Erev Tov. Good evening. Shavua Tov. Welcome. I'm just going to say a brief word about our schedule for tonight and then introduce our speaker. So we'll be here till 8:30 with this first part of the program. There'll be a half an hour for dessert back through those doors in the hallway. And then the Slichot service will begin at 9 o'clock. Okay. So this is Rabbi Michael Zedek. He, in his career, has been the senior rabbi of B'nai Yehuda congregation in Kansas City, the CEO of the Jewish Federation of Cincinnati, and the senior rabbi of Emmanuel congregation in Chicago. He's now retired and lives back in Kansas City. He is married to Karen, has two daughters, Susan and Betsy, and grandfather of four. And so for a special interest for us tonight, Rabbi Zedek is the author of the book Taking Miracles Seriously, A Journey to Everyday Spirituality, and that is the topic for our lecture, which is tomorrow night at 7 o'clock in this very space. He's also the rabbi in residence at St. Paul's School of Theology, which is a United Methodist seminary. And just as a little fun fact, I worked with Rabbi Zedek for 3 years. It was my first job as a rabbi from 1988 to 1991 in Kansas City. Michael Zedek.
Thank you. Let the record show that there was tepid applause in the introduction. Oh, come on, smile. No. It's, I'm old enough that I remember when I would say I was from Brooklyn and people would applaud, even people from Pittsburgh, when you're saying, thank you, that one little hand clap there. Yeah, Brooklyn. So, all speakers have a variety of responses to introductions. You can use these without attribution, I promise you. Of all the introductions I've ever received, that's the most recent. And as well, much more importantly, even as Rabbi Henry mentioned that we worked together a few weeks ago, she was also the tutor for my older daughter's bat mitzvah, which my older daughter remembers with a certain element of fondness and a certain element of she cracked the whip and she did well. So thank you very much. First, if I say something that's not clear, by the way, my voice is giving me a little hard time. I normally sound much more mellifluous. If I say something that doesn't make sense to you, what is he talking about? I don't understand. Make it clear, okay? Please, promise. I mean, I find myself relatively interesting, but if you're not, we're not having a communication. Fair? So, as you will presumably find out, I love stories, because I think in some ways stories help us understand the path we're supposed to walk, occasionally make sure to remind us to go on that path, and even on occasion outflank our resistance to change. So, for instance, this story happens to be about a rabbi whom I would not be terribly fond of, and he would not be terribly fond of us because he didn't have a lot of tolerance for non-Orthodox Jews. His name is the Chafetz Chaim. And the Chafetz Chaim was called as a character witness for one of his students at a trial in Europe. And as many of you may be aware, anybody an attorney? Whew, we're lucky. In Europe, it is not always a trial by jury. Occasionally it's a trial by jury. It's also sometimes a trial by a judge who's the arbiter of courtroom behavior and the decider of the verdict, or 3 judges, or a judge and 2 lay people. At any rate, the Chafetz Chaim is called as a character witness for his student who's on trial. The defense attorney, therefore, introduces the rabbi to the court by saying, Judge, you know what the Jews say about this man? They say he's so saintly that on one occasion he had discovered when he returned home that a thief had broken in. And the thief, surprised by the rabbi's sudden appearance, ran away. And the rabbi ran after him, shouting, I declare all of my property ownerless. I declare all of my property ownerless. Talmudic category, which would mean there's no crime. And by the way, for those of you who are fans of at least my favorite musical, Les Miserables, it sounds a lot like the bishop when Jean Valjean comes back and you forgot the other candlestick, right? So that's the story as the defense attorney tells the judge. The judge peers down from the bench and says, "You don't really believe that now, do you?" "I don't know, Judge, but this much I do know. They don't tell stories like that about you or me." And one of the reasons why I find that compelling, especially at this time of year, is because we are really supposed to look at the book of our lives, the stories we are writing with our lives. And we do write stories in other people's experience of us. And I suspect that this time of year is clearly a moment to, is that the story we want to have people recall, remember, express, understand, rejoice in about us? So, it's the Jewish New Year, right? Right? That's a trick question, wrong. First, as you may know, we have at least 4 Jewish New Years, right? Second, this New Year comes in the 7th month of the calendar, right? And most people don't have their New Year begin in the 7th calendar. And of all the various accusations that are hurled against our people, and we've gotten more accustomed to hearing some of them again lately, haven't we? Rare, if ever, are we called stupid. So why the 7th month? Well, because technically Rosh Hashanah is not the new year, even as we change the cycle. Rosh means head. Shana, it becomes year. But as a verb, it means to repeat or change, which is remarkable in terms of the ambiguity of that word, to repeat or change. So Rosh Hashanah could literally be understood as the chief time to repeat or change, to alter the story or to add to the story of our lives. Rosh Hashanah. I have a suspicion that among the reasons why it happens now is in the northern hemisphere, it's fall. And fall is, after all, a time for reflection because it's a time that reminds us limits, mortality, the dying of something. Can it be born into something else? The chief time to change. So, for example, on my ride in from the airport, I noticed that the leaves are changing, correct? The leaves aren't changing. No, they're not changing. Technically, what we call changing isn't the case. Those colors that are being revealed that will suggest to us something exquisite and something transitory and something beautiful, not a bad metaphor for our lives, have always been there. It's the fact that the chlorophyll manufacturing has stopped, that the colors that are already there reveal themselves. I find that personally as an exquisite reminder of some of the digging, some of the cheshbon hanefeshing, the inventory of soul that we ought to be doing lots of times, but how much the more so at this time of year. Rosh Hashanah, the story that we're writing, the chief time to repeat or change. And I suspect we need it every year because the things I should repeat, I change, and the things I change, I all too often repeat. One little addition on this, because it is, we think, and let me take a step back. As you may be aware, almost all Jewish holidays have a twofold aspect. One is a connection to the time of the year, and the other is a moment in the history of our people. Some people would argue that Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are yotzei min haklal, exceptions to that rule. But there is a minority opinion that in the ancient world, the fiscal year began and ended approximately this time, which is to say, to be clearer, the king's tax collectors would go out and take a look at how the farmers were doing before the harvest. You're not going to trust the farmer to tell you how he did once the harvest is in. Wink, wink. So if you're going to take a look at the book, if we're going to write down how much the more so, the Sefer Chaim, the book of life, or even better, the Sefer Chaim Tovim, the Sefer of making a good life. So, stories. Our first story. This is a poem by Portia Nelson. She says her title is Autobiography in 5 Chapters. And some of us, no doubt, write stories which might be characterized as science fiction. Some of us, epic poems. Some of us, nothing more than a sonnet. But no matter the length, there can be beauty and meaning and value. So this poem. I walk down the street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I am lost. I am hopeless. It isn't my fault. It takes forever to find a way out. Chapter 2. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place, but it isn't my fault. It takes a long time to get out. Chapter 3. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it is there. I still fall in. It's a habit. My eyes are open. I know where I am. It's my fault. I get out immediately. Chapter 4. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Chapter 5. I walk down another street. Anybody want to speculate why I think this particular notion has some resonance for us at this time of year? We're accepting responsibility for the decisions we make, even the ones that we might not be able to be doing in a conscious way. It is a habit. It's who I am. All right. Please. You learn from the past, absolutely. Any other? You changed what you were doing. At least this person in this poem does. But I especially like the last chapter. I mean, some of us, no doubt, have recurring patterns in our lives. And we do not recognize that it's a recurring pattern, but we fall into the same phenomenon. I'll be confessional. There are certain people who throw me off course. It's the same person wearing different disguises. If I understood what is the vulnerability in me that person throws me off course by, I might become more of the person I'm called to be. Please, you thought you would have wanted to add something? But isn't it remarkably hard how hard it is to make a fundamental change? You know, I'm not going to do. There's even a story. Some of you know the name Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, yes? So this story and then a different story about him. The story is told that it's Yom Kippur afternoon, and Levi Yitzchak, everyone knew, was the greatest speaker of his age. He closes his eyes in contemplation. I promise you, rabbis never fall asleep on the pulpit. Wink, wink. He closed his eyes in contemplation. It's Yom Kippur afternoon. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak is in an ecstatic trance. He's transported, as the story says, remember it's just a story, to the heavenly realm. He finds himself before the throne of glory. Yom Kippur afternoon, he gives a speech. Now, we don't know the speech because it's just a story, but the story says, he says, Rabbono Shel Olam. He probably said Rabbono Shel Olam. That's for you. Ruler of the universe. We can't change it on our own. It's too great for us. You have to intervene. The ruler of the universe is so moved by the eloquence of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak's plea that he says, you're right, I'm going to bring redemption. Just then, Chaim the washerman, a nobody, faints from hunger. Because if the rabbi doesn't get out of his wink-wink ecstatic trance, can't finish the service, can't break his fast. Levi Yitzchak sees this, he gets up to go. The angels in this story, by the way, are radical liberal commies. How can you leave? God's about to change the world. And Levi Yitzchak says, according to the story, who says the price of saving the world should be Chaim the washerman? And he leaves. And the story concludes, a heavenly voice called out, Levi Yitzchak, you are saving the world. Now, I would submit to you that to be religious in the deepest sense of what our people bring to the world is to know, even though that story never happened, it's true. When you're just taking care of the Chaim the washerman, we're getting as close as one could possibly to saving the world. Different story about Levi Yitzchak. When Levi Yitzchak's about to be born, the angels in this story, the angels are very liberal as opposed to conservative. He's such a saintly soul that he could perhaps bring about redemption. And the master of the universe comforts the angels by saying, don't worry, I'm going to make him a rabbi. He'll be so busy doing what a rabbi has to do that he'll never have time to change the world. So let's look at a changing of the world. You know, this prayer, of all the prayers, what shall we say, gets us in more trouble than any other. And my gosh, does it have a terrible resonance this year especially. Who shall live and who shall die? I've known more than a few people who think it's scandalous, horrifying, got no business being anywhere. First of all, I don't believe in Santa Claus. I don't believe for a moment that God is deciding, this year we'll give you a little this, we'll give you a little that, I'll give you a little more life. Because at some point, we all are finished with this journey we call life. Which is why it seems to me the concluding line of this section, in the English, but repentance, prayer, and righteousness avert the severity of the decree. That's a close to accurate translation. The old prayer books, with the superstition in it, used to say, but repentance, prayer, and charity avert the severe decree, or turn over the severe decree. If you just do enough teshuvah, if you just do enough tzedakah, if you just do enough tefillah, okay, I'm going to give you another year. The decree is the same for all of us. We are here for literally less than a blink of the eye at the scope of eternity. Whether it's 104 years, as my mother, may she rest in peace, or 58 years, as my father, may he rest in peace. It is less than a blink of the eye in the scope of eternity. But if we live with a certain intensity, a certain clarity, if we perchance make teshuvah, turning one to the other, bringing people close, dropping some of the armor that keeps us separated from each other, we might become more of the human becomings we're meant to be. If we do tefillah, and by the way, among the hardest things for liberal Jews is to have a prayer life. If we're honest, that's one of the great challenges of this time of year, right? A whole bunch of people are going to show up because they show up. Not because, oh my goodness, I'm going to be moved in some fashion by this stuff. You got to have spring training. That's what Elul is in some ways. It's spring training for the major leagues on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But tefillah is not urging, begging, nudging the universe to go off course. By the way, the English word prayer comes from the Latin word precare. It means to beg. I don't know about you, but I'm not a good beggar. The Hebrew word is hitpalel, lahitpalel. To pray is how we translate it, but it's reflexive. It means to judge oneself. So this comment, but anybody remember the name Rabbi Morris Adler, Olav Shalom? So the few of us who do, Rabbi Adler was the rabbi of Shaarei Zedek in Detroit, Michigan. Unfortunately, he got a certain horrifying notoriety on a Shabbos morning at his synagogue. A young man whom he was counseling murdered him. But they put together a book of his sermons called The Voice Still Speaks. And in there, if he were alive today, he'd say it the way I'm going to say it, because it was a time when we didn't have the same sensitivity to language. One who rises from prayer a better person, that person's prayer is answered. That's the point and purpose of prayer in our tradition, for sure. It's a lot of thank you more than it's please, and it's a lot of an inventory of the person I am and the person I'm supposed to be. This is my little cliche on this. I am much more than I ever thought I would be, and much less than I should be, and both statements are true. Wisdom is if it's okay for both of those statements to be true. Because if I can accept that, the paradox is I become more the better and less of the worse. And then, of course, tzedakah, which doesn't just mean writing checks. It literally means establishing justice. That the world has a shortage of that for sure. And those three elements, for whatever amount of time is your or my portion, would give a deeper resonance, a deeper meaning, in fact, meaning to these moments. It would mean that it's more than a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Nothing at all. So, I learned this in deep from my father. I mentioned he died when he was 58. I was 18. And of the experiences that shape the adult I hope to become, and every Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur recognize where I am falling short and where I am embracing, he set out to teach me what I consider the four most important lessons in my life. And the four most important lessons I'm still trying to embrace. Rather than learning that life can't be trusted, it ain't a good bargain. What's the point of loving someone? All you're going to do is lose them. To love means we lose. To live means we outlive. He taught me these four lessons. Lesson number one, life is a very precious and very fragile gift. Self-evident, right? Lesson number two, were I to die today, I want more. I am so freaking intoxicated with the gift of life that before I became a rabbi, I taught English and writing for years, so there's a lot of poetry in me that sometimes I remember. Edna St. Vincent Millay, "O life, I cannot hold you close enough." Lesson number three, and I mean this with every fiber of my being, were I to die today, it would be enough to say Dayenu. It would be enough to say thank you. I want more, but if this is all I get, thank you. Lesson number four, I'd rather have my father than have learned any of it. I can't have that, but I can have what his life still means in me, still infuses and guides and helps me, because after all, you don't really believe that now, do you? This much I do know, Judge. They don't tell stories about that, like that about you or me. The stories that we can unwind, the stories that we can intone, the stories that we can make somehow purposeful in our lives. So, we got time for a couple more. I collect stories. And among the reasons I collect them is because scholars claim there are only 7 basic stories. Some people say 6, by the way. And then Leo Tolstoy came along and said there are really only 2 stories. The first story begins, a stranger came to town. The second story begins, I went on a long journey. And if you think about it for a second, that really does encompass just about every story imaginable. From the Odyssey and the Iliad to every Clint Eastwood movie, to Barbie, she's on a long journey, right? I think the Jewish story can be understood by one little change. We are on a long journey, and we are the strangers who come to town. How do we treat strangers? Welcome them in? Unlikely nowadays, isn't it? Aren't we suspicious of strangers? Aren't we worried about strangers? I mean, I grew up, you could pick up a hitchhiker. You would never do that now, right? You would never, no. But in fact, it's one of the reasons why our tradition says that variations on, you know the heart of the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt, 36 times. By the way, nobody can find the 36 times, but a sage in the Talmud said so it's 36. By the way, I tried to count up once I got to 42, but 36 is better because it's a good Jewish number, right? Double chai. So, if it were obvious, the text wouldn't need to tell us over and over and over again. By the way, if you unpack it a little bit, if you know the heart of the stranger, then you may not know that person's name, but they're not a stranger. You know? And by the way, we'll do that another time. So, people view us as the strangers who come to town, don't they? Some people find that exotic and exciting. Some people find it off-putting and scary. In fact, I didn't know I was going to go to this tonight, but we're in Pennsylvania, right? And does anyone know the name Dr. Roy Eckert of blessed memory? Dr. Eckert was a Lutheran minister and a professor of religion at Lehigh University. He offered a compelling analysis many years ago that I think has an enormous resonance today. To wit, he says, I grew up learning that Christianity is superior to Judaism. For after all, you become a Christian, you're just born a Jew. Now, what he meant was, of course, that from the perspective of Christianity, you're born a pagan, you become a Christian. Whereas, theoretically, some of us were born Jewish, others of us become Jewish by adoption. But for the moment, allow his notion. But then he says, Hitler came along and taught me a very powerful lesson. What was it about Israel of the flesh, his name for the Jews, such that Hitler knew we were his mortal enemy, and had he won the war, we wouldn't have tonight. There would be none of us. He answers his own question with a remarkable integrity and says, Moses lives in us. The story of freedom gets into the world by us, which is, by the way, why every dictatorship, without exception, has persecuted Jews. We are dangerous for those who would wish to take away freedom. Hitler knew we were his mortal enemy. If that's true of Israel of the flesh, his name for us, would that not also be true of Israel of the spirit, his name for Christians? And I don't know if you're aware, somewhere in the order of 5 million Christians died in the concentration camps for the courage of their convictions. But then, among the reasons I admire him so, he pushes it. He says, yes, but you can always stop being Israel of the spirit. You can't stop being Israel of the flesh. I would go a little further. No Christian could seriously imagine Jesus not going to the concentration camps to relieve the suffering there. But even if he didn't want to go, he'd be sent. He was a Jew. But a different story. A story that I wanted to tell. This story is told in Buddhist tradition. A woman's only child dies. She goes to see the Buddha. Restore my child to life. He says to her, bring me a mustard seed from a home that has not known sorrow, and I will restore your child to life. By the way, you could do a book about this thick with mustard seeds. Why? Anybody a major gourmet cook or anything? Mustard seeds are extraordinarily small. It would be the equivalent to say nowadays saying, bring me a subatomic particle and I'll do what you ask. But the woman understands what the Buddha is teaching her. There's no such home. And she leaves, resigned to her fate. Here's the Jewish version of that story. A woman's only child dies. She goes to see Alicia. For those whose Sunday school lessons are rusty, Alicia does a CPR-like reviving of a child who seems to have died in the Torah, in the Tanakh, and he's the right one for folklore to pick. Bring me a mustard seed from a home that has not known sorrow, and I will restore your child to life. And now it becomes a Jewish story. She goes looking. No one could imagine a Jewish mother being told, this is what you need, not trying. Fair? Many years later, they meet, and he recognizes her. It's a beautiful subtlety. They don't recognize each other. He recognizes her. He says to her, why didn't you come back to me? And she says, well, at first, I was desperately looking for that mustard seed that would restore my child to life. But in every home I entered, there was pain, and I was too busy trying to relieve pain to return to you. The Buddhist story teaches the wisdom of acceptance. What is what is what is. The Jewish version is what makes the West, for good or ill. It's the wisdom of struggle. There's a difference between the world as it is and the world as it should be. In the world as it is, too many horrible things happen. But in the world as it should be, can we do some things to make it less likely, to push the envelope, tilt against windmills, to bring an end to this or that calamity? We may be wrong, but what a wonderful and wondrous way to be wrong. By the way, a small dividend. Judaism's great contribution, then, is to bridge the distance between the world as it is and the world as it should be. But as well, she also knows you can't get better unless you're helping others get better. No one recovers from that kind of loss, God forbid. But will you only be bitter? Or can you find some ways to embrace life still, even with the woundedness of, well, Nachman of Bratslav supposedly said there's nothing so whole as a broken heart. And only those who know that experience know how true that truly is. Or as Ralph Waldo Emerson supposedly put it, God never made anything that didn't have a crack in it, which is a good point for this time of year. Then Leonard Cohen comes along and says, that's all right. That's how the light gets in. If I had written it, I hope I would have said, that's all right. That's how the light gets out. Because Judaism makes an unbelievably outrageous claim about every person, not just Jewish persons, every person. Every one of us has a little Tselem Elohim, translated image of God. By the way, it's the only time the word image isn't used positively in the entire Hebrew Bible. Otherwise, it means idol, as in negative stuff, right? By the way, it's the modern Hebrew word letzalim means to take a photograph. You want to see a picture of God or of holiness or the sacred or of infinite value, look at the person next to you. Don't forget, look at you, each and every one of us. I learned this from a story. This is a true story. I actually think this particular story is in my book, Taking Miracles Seriously, A Journey to Everyday Spirituality, available on Amazon.com. I was walking out after a family service, and the dirty little secret of family services, rabbis, I'm going to be kicked out of the union for giving away this dirty little secret, is that the clergy person is really talking to the adults, pretending he or she is talking to the kids. You know, oh, that's so cute. Wasn't that cute what the rabbi said to my little Johnny? Oh. And maybe the adult gets the lesson. So this beautiful little 4-year-old girl, remember the old building? We had an 88-foot high ceiling. So this little girl, in an outdoor voice, says, "Mommy, the rabbi confused me." I got very worried. I thought the mommy would say, "Honey, don't worry, he confuses everybody." Instead, the mommy said, "Why is that, honey?" I thought that was a promising beginning. "Why is that, honey?" And the little girl said, "Mommy, the rabbi said there's a part of God in every one of us." That is the chutzpahdik, amazing claim that our tradition says. There's a sacred dimension in everyone. And the mommy said, "That's right, honey. There's a part of God in every one of us." But Mommy, isn't God bigger than all of us? Now, wherever you are in God, the universe is clearly bigger than we are, right? Fair? Of course. And the mommy said, that's right, honey. God is bigger than you or me. And then this 4-year-old, single most brilliant theological statement I've ever heard, she said, Mommy, if God is bigger than us and God lives in us, wouldn't God show through? Usually gets an awe. You've known people like that. You might not use that language, but there's something exquisite and engaging and attractive and wondrous, at least sometimes, in such persons. The English word is they have enthusiasm, right? Anybody know Greek? It comes from the Greek enthusiasmos. Enthusiasmos means to be full of God. The Hebrew word is hit la'avut, to be on fire. And if maybe enough of us are on fire with a certain joy and wonder and excitement and attractiveness, we might just start a spontaneous combustion. Wouldn't be the worst thing that ever happened. It truly wouldn't be the worst thing that ever happened. So, I learned the power of stories from a story. Another true story, and then I would be delighted. Questions, comments, concerns, worries, alternative speeches. Deal? Otherwise, I'll just keep going. I tried very hard not to repeat a story when I was in the pulpit. If I did repeat a story, I would say something like, some of you may remember, trying to get the folks on my side, right? But I tried very hard not to repeat. I was speaking to a bar and bat mitzvah class, 12-year-old and almost 13-year-olds. I was going to tell them a story about a certain character in the Talmud, 37 volumes in the Talmud, named Rabbi Nathan. He appears twice, which is to say he's not one of the most important sages of our tradition. I start to tell the story. I had used it at the conclusion of a Yom Kippur morning sermon 3 years earlier. They were 8 and 9 years old. They had no business even listening. And several of them said, oh, Rabbi, I remember that. I can tell that. Of course, they couldn't tell it as well as I would, but that was meant to be funny. So here's the story. For those who want, it's Avodah Zarah 9b. The rabbis, the sages, are debating whether it's okay to go to the gladiatorial combats of ancient Rome or not. And of course, they're going to say we must stay away from such brutality, such horror. Obvious, correct? And for the first time, Rabbi Nathan opens his mouth and says, we have to go. And now they want to kick him out. But they just say to him, Mahasiba, what is your reasoning? And he says, when the crowd shouts for the blood of the defeated gladiator and goes thumbs down. By the way, there's a lot of modern scholarship that thinks that they actually shouted thumbs up to kill the gladiator, but don't ruin a good story with facts. Thumbs down, your job is to shout thumbs up. And I think that is an awesomely exquisite job description for all of us. Because there's more than enough evidence to say, oi. But our tradition insists to use the phrase that we are prisoners of hope. And there's a lot worse things to be captured by. To shout thumbs up. One of my great teachers was Abraham Joshua Heschel. He once suggested, it may be that we won't be redeemed, but at least we should be worthy of being redeemed. So the point is to live a life that strives to get closer. To wit, if you are familiar with Jewish tombstone calligraphy, there are two phrases that are on stones in Hebrew that are regularly repeated. One is the Hebrew word niftar, which is usually translated departed, and then the date. But niftar literally means to be discharged, as in to be discharged from service. While we're here, report for duty. And I would think that Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is the rendezvous to say, let's get going, let's report for duty. Remind me of Rosh Hashanah for a second. The other is usually an acronym, abbreviation, Tehi Nishmatot Tzorah B'Tzorah Chaim. Just about every rabbi in the world would translate it, may his or her soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life. But B'Tzorah B'Tzorah Chaim does not mean eternal life. It means may his or her soul be bound up in the web, in the network, in the bundle of our lives. That is doable and doable and doable until we give the breath back to its source. After all, we call it inspiration, to take in the breath. And we call it expiration, to give back the breath or spirit. And we should do that for as long as we're capable. Rosh Hashanah. Somebody once argued that the order's wrong. It should be Yom Kippur and then Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah, Hayom Harat Ha'olam. And endless numbers of children's services have said, today is the birthday of the world. And what present are you going to give to the world? And what present are you going to give the world, right? Have any of my colleagues ever give that sermon? I see one knowledging head. But Hayom Harat Ha'olam does not mean today is the birthday of the world. Hara means is pregnant. Today is pregnant. Always. Today we are pregnant with possibilities. Will we embrace them? Will we live them? Will we get closer to them? In short, it's because of learning of all the wonder of the world that we then get to Yom Kippur, where, I really did fall short here. I missed the mark there, but I can try again and again and again. After all, Yom Kippur is going to start with Kol Nidre, right? And as soon as Kol Nidre is done, we're going to get what we supposedly came for. Vayomer Ad Hashem, Salachti Kidvarecha. And God said, I've forgiven according to your word. So we're done. Let's go. Instead, we're going to spend, quote unquote, 25 hours in shul, right? Why? You got what you came for. No. What we come for is an inventory of our character. What we come for is to spend some of that time in a cheshbon hanefesh. So one more Levi Yitzhak story. It was Levi Yitzhak's habit, according to the story, every night before trying to sleep. Any of us in the category of trying to sleep nowadays? Yeah. To take an inventory of the day. Levi Yitzhak, yesterday you said you wouldn't do this, but you did. Yesterday you said you would do this, but you didn't. Yes, yesterday I wasn't telling the truth. Today I'm telling the truth. May that day come soon and speedily in our day, that we might tell the truth. All of us are works in progress. Are we making some progress? That's clearly what these days of awe are meant to intend for us. Little Pintala extra. As you know, the tradition says, sincere repentance on Yom Kippur, sins against God are forgiven. But sins against another, you must first seek the connection to the person offended. Then there's effectiveness. And of course, we've got a flexibility. If I've offended you in any fashion, I implore your forgiveness 3 times. If the person still is unwilling to be reconciled, they're guilty of a sin. They're holding a grudge. Now, it doesn't mean best friends, but it needs let go. In fact, I said the last story, but this is the last maybe story. Rabbi Harold Kushner, of blessed memory, tells a story of, he gave a sermon on Rosh Hashanah about the need for us to forgive those who have hurt us. Woman comes to see him during the week, angry as all get out. Many years earlier, her former husband had left her with a severely disabled child, no child support, and every day she cursed him for 16 years. Why should I forgive this no good, etc.? And Kushner said, for 16 years, you've been holding a hot coal in your hand, and all you've been doing is burning your hand. We should stop doing that, because it's not the other person we're going to lift up. It's ourselves who we will liberate. Okay. Questions, comments, commentaries, or do can I do what you want me to do more? Please, Jamie. Rabbi Gibson. Can you all hear him? Yeah. That's what. Oprah Winfrey just arrived.
Take two. We all remember things that, we are all told of things that we forgot and that people remind us of. And I was saying that 31 and a half years ago in Montreal, at the rabbinic convention there, you introduced me to a book that I've used and given out countless copies of, called The Spirituality of Imperfection by Kurtz and Ketchum, which has an incredible story about a man who has a problem with dandelions, but that's another story. At that same convention, our colleague Shelley Har described the pain of his daughter coming back from a Year in Israel program, and the night she got home, went out with friends and was killed in a car accident. To hold that kind of brokenness, to be able to share it, to be open to other people's comfort is an extraordinary act of courage. And I would say, just as a footnote to your wonderful words, that if this season allows us to open our hearts a little bit to receive, not just give, to be told of our own worth and believe it for once, then the holidays have fulfilled their purpose.
Thank you. Two things. By the way, the book, The Spirituality of Imperfection, is still available. It's almost as good as my book. But one of the exquisite, by the way, the title is so awesome, is it not? Because we all tend to think, if only I get better. No, imperfection. Is there a spirituality in that? Because the paradox is, if we can embrace our imperfection, we get more beautiful in the imperfection. It's based on the 12 steps of AA, and it compares them to Sufi stories, early church fathers, and Hasidic tales. You don't even have to read the book. All the stories are in bold print. So one little thing that comes out of that. They're talking about what's the difference between religion and spirituality. Religion is for people, this is, by the way, it's not a Jewish idea at all. I don't agree with it, but I think it's an exquisite notion. Religion is for people who are frightened of going to hell. Spirituality is for people who have already been there. Have already been there. Any other comments? Because it reminds me of some more stories. Please.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank
I
you.
just want to say that I am the stranger come to town. I've only been reading the Torah, which I thought was called the Old Testament, for about maybe 6 or 7 weeks, and I found it to be absolutely fascinating. And I also just want to say I feel so welcomed here, and this community is absolutely excellent. So that'll just be how I'll start. But there was something I said in Torah study this morning, which I thought I'd like to repeat to the rest of you. So in the Republic, by Plato, there's an analogy about the great architect who wants to build a house. And so to build a house, you might need a mason, you might need a glass guy, you might need a plumber. not exactly, in Greek history. Anyway, but they all have these different skills, and only the architect can understand how they all work together. But the mason, he has more than just one skill. He has the skill of masonry, but he also practices a different skill, which is the skill of wage earning. Wage earning. And so that whenever the mason is doing his job, he's also thinking about how much he's bringing home. So maybe instead of laying all the bricks very quickly, he'll be on an hourly rate, and so he'll lay them quite slowly. And so yes, he does appreciate the architect's role, but he is a bit different. He cares about his own body, his own wage earning. And so I'll continue this thought that liberalism generally has considered the dichotomy between democracy and the republic, where the democracy is the body and the republic is the representatives who actually guide the whole thing, the spirit. And so there are a few people who have made some wonderful comments on it. Like James Madison said that they were actually quite close and that we lived in a democratic republic. Then there would be like John Stuart Mill, who stated that it was actually the spirit who reigned supreme. The republic was what guided the rest of us, and that the knowledge would just sort of flow towards those representatives. It was rather obvious what to do if you were a representative. You just had to listen. And there are people like de Tocqueville who said that it was the democracy which reigned supreme in America, that it was the democratic urges that were truly so powerful that he actually stated that presidents in the United States are terrible for two reasons. One, only the worst people run, and two, we choose the worst of them. So I just was hoping you would maybe comment. What do you think is the relationship between the spirit and the body based on what I said?
Thank you. First, just a small footnote on de Tocqueville. I'm paraphrasing. In his journey in America, I have met the most happy and sad people ever, for all of them are all too often focused on all the good things they have not, as opposed to all the wondrous ways in which we are blessed. That's my add-on. Greek thought has undermined the world by dividing us into body and spirit. That's not a Jewish notion at all. In fact, I teach at a United Methodist seminary, and one of the things that the students drink is the bankruptcy of it's all about your soul, it's all about living forever, it's all about eternal life. Nobody can know that. Now, by the way, Judaism says we don't know. We trust God on it. But the notion that my soul is pure and my body is corrupt, please. Judaism would clearly articulate a different view. We are a unity, as assuredly as we understand the universe is called a universe, one song, one God. My genitalia are as capable of holiness as my mind is as capable of horror. In fact, true story. Some of you know the name St. Augustine. He lived, by the way, a reprobate life. He loved women until he got religion. Now he's a saint, right? And he writes, when a couple engage in sexual intercourse, the Holy Spirit leaves the room. The body, corruption, it's among the reasons why Catholicism teaches unless the procreative act is capable of producing a child, it ain't okay, and please don't enjoy it. Judaism, 2,000 years ago, when a couple engage in sexual intercourse, the Shekhinah is in the room with them, the divine presence. Or one of the things I like is, this happens to be the 101st anniversary of Buber's publication of I and Thou. Some of you, I'm sure, know that book. And if you were alive today, he'd say it this way. We become what we are, children of God, by becoming what we are, brothers and sisters of each other. No wonder God's in trouble. We're having real trouble on the brothers and sisters part, right? Which reminds me of a story. This one's in the book. Besides the rabbis in the room, anybody recognize the name Harry Golden? I said besides the rabbis in the room. For 2 cents plain, I can get it for you wholesale, only in America. He was the quote-unquote editor of the Carolina Israelite. And he tells a story which has a distinct resonance in my life because my father was part of this generation. His dad was an immigrant, socialist, atheist, part of the immigrant movement, 1880 to 1920. Until the present day, by the way, was the largest movement of human population in human history. Today has surpassed it. And it's going to get more because of the dishevelment and dislocations in our world, which are only accelerating. Nonetheless, even though he was a socialist atheist, he went to synagogue all the time. Golden, as a teenager, of course, had the job of attacking his father's inconsistencies. That's what teenagers do for a living. Or as Mark Twain once said, when a child reaches age 13, put him in a barrel and feed him through the hole. When he reaches age 16, seal up the hole. By the way, I used to think God made 2 mistakes, teething and teenagers. Teething makes no sense to me on any level. Evolutionarily, why does the child have to suffer so soon? Why do the parents have to lose sleep? But teenagers, I understand. It's God's way of you wanting to let them go. Back to Golden. Golden attacks his father, Papa, why in the world do you go to synagogue? You don't take any of that seriously. And in his defense, he says, you know Garfinkel? Of course I know Garfinkel. Garfinkel's your best friend. Garfinkel goes to synagogue to talk to God. I go to synagogue to talk to Garfinkel. Now, the interesting thing, of course, and this is where it comes into, is when you're really talking to Garfinkel, really getting close to Garfinkel, feeling the urgings, the pain, the wonder, the joy, the problems, the skills of Garfinkel, you're getting as close as it's possible in this world to meet the face of God. Which is why when Jacob has the single most important wrestling match in human history and becomes Israel, by the way, had I written the Hebrew Bible, it would have been better. At least some of you laughed. Because I would have had him be Israel, and he's now transformed, right? He's Israel, he's Israel, he's Israel. No, but the text knows better than I. We have Israel moments and we have Jacob moments, which is why we need Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But it says, a man wrestled with him until the break of dawn. That's the beginning of this little pericope. And then it says, Ki sarita im Elohim ve'in anashim vatuchal. For you have something, striven, wrestled with Elohim, God, the anashim, and human beings, vatuchal. Often mistranslated, and you prevailed. And literally means, and you are competent. You are capable. That's your core competencies, to wrestle with. By the way, people often don't like to be tested, to be pushed. But that's our job. And he wrestled with a man until the break of dawn, and then he names the place Peniel. Ki ra'iti Elohim panim el panim v'tinatzel nafshi. Because I saw God face to face, and my life was preserved. Now wait a second, he saw a man. He wrestled with a man. And he saw in that man the sacred dimension that all of us have, if only we would let it show and let it grow. Are we okay?
No, we're done. We need to be done.
We need to be done. Well, we are hardly done, but we're finished.
So I want to say thank you to Rabbi Zedek. I did read through the book this afternoon. That story about Garfinkel is in the book. And it's a really nice book. It's a combination of stories, Torah, and there's some really nice poetry in there as well. So thank you for this, and we look forward to hearing you again tomorrow night, 7 o'clock in this room for the LeVar lecture.